What if the past were not merely history, but a living, malevolent entity coiled around our present, demanding an impossible, terrifying price? What if the very blood that flows through your veins carried not just the legacy of your ancestors, but their most profound, unspeakable debts, pulling you relentlessly towards an abyss from which there is no return? Along the craggy, storm-battered coastline of coastal Maine, where the Atlantic's roar is a constant, mournful lament, lies Blackwood Cove. It is a place where the skeletal remains of forgotten fishing trawlers litter the shore, corroded by salt and time, where the air hangs heavy with the scent of brine and decay, and the silence, when the wind dies, is profound, broken only by the distant, rhythmic pounding of the unseen tide against ancient cliffs. The houses, weathered and salt-stained, sag under the weight of generations of untold stories, their windows like vacant eyes staring out at an indifferent, eternal sea. This is no ordinary New England village. It is a sentinel at the edge of something far older, far more sinister. Here, within the desolate embrace of Blackwood Cove, resides the Merrow family. For generations, they have been bound by an unspoken terror, living in the shadow of an ancestral curse, a monstrous debt tethered to a forgotten voyage. Whispers of it have haunted their lineage, now resurfacing with terrifying ferocity. This is not some quaint local legend, but a chilling, active nightmare, deeply embedded in the very fabric of American maritime history, yet deliberately erased from its official records. At the heart of this generational torment lies the figure of Captain Alastair Merrow, a man whose obsessive pursuit of rumored riches and ancient artifacts led him to the uncharted, perilous depths of the Strait of Malacca, a place brimming with untold mysteries. He sought treasure, but he brought back something else entirely, a spiritual and physical blight, a terrifying terrestrial inheritance that manifests in chilling ways, escalating with each passing generation. It is a curse woven into their very being, a direct consequence of an unfathomable transgression against an ancient, oceanic entity awakened by his greed. Today, this ancient horror has found its most terrifying manifestation in Silas Merrow, a young man from Blackwood Cove with an inexplicable affinity for the sea, now succumbing to disturbing symptoms. He suffers violent, catatonic episodes, speaking in an unknown language, his fevered mind sketching impossible, intricate maps of submerged ruins and monstrous, never-before-seen abyssal creatures. His condition defies all medical explanation, deteriorating rapidly, threatening to drag him and his entire bloodline into an abyss beyond human comprehension. What unspeakable bargain did Captain Alastair Merrow strike in those distant, forgotten waters? What ancient guardians did he disturb? And what lost civilizations did he plunder? And how can a family fight a terror that transcends human understanding? A force woven into the very fabric of their being, a curse that asserts its ancient claims through their own blood. Are you ready to dive with us into this unexplored abyssal world, where the past is not merely prologue, but a relentless, living entity? Ilara Merrow, a woman accustomed to the desolate isolation of Blackwood Cove, understood the profound risk of inviting an outsider into her family's hallowed, haunted space. Yet, Silas's accelerating decline left her no alternative. Her desperate plea for help found its way to Dr. Eris Thorne, a name whispered in hushed tones within academic circles. A deep-sea cartographer of immense, if now tarnished, reputation. Thorne, a man whose career had been built on precise hydrographic surveys and the meticulous charting of abyssal topography, was an unlikely candidate for a mystery steeped in generational curses and impossible drawings. He was a creature of empirical data, a staunch advocate for the tangible, the measurable. His skepticism was not merely a professional stance, it was the bedrock of his very being. Dr. Thorne embodied the pragmatic spirit of American academia, forged in institutions where unproven theories were met with rigorous scrutiny. He had spent decades mapping the very real, often brutal realities of the ocean floor. Tectonic plates, hydrothermal vents, the crushing pressures of the Marianas Trench. His mind processed the world in contours and coordinates, not in omens or premonitions. He dismissed folklore as charming anachronisms and dismissed the supernatural as misinterpretations of natural phenomena. When Alara's cryptic message reached him, detailing impossible maps drawn by her son, maps of ruins that defied known geological surveys and creatures that existed only in nightmare, his initial reaction was one of polite, professional disinterest, bordering on scientific condescension. He saw a grieving mother, perhaps susceptible to delusion, attributing a tragic illness to a fanciful origin. Yet, something in Alara's raw, unvarnished fear, a chilling sincerity that permeated her words, piqued a sliver of his dormant curiosity. It wasn't the supernatural element that hooked him. It was the impossible precision of Silas's drawings relayed by Alara. A cartographer's eye saw the potential for a genuine anomaly, a cartographical riddle, rather than a spiritual one. He agreed to consult, not out of belief in a curse, but out of a professional fascination with the unknown. His method was unwavering. Observe, measure, analyze, and then, only then, theorize. His first step, he informed Alara, would be to meticulously document every line, every symbol, every impossible detail of Silas's maps, treating them not as manifestations of a curse, but as data points, however aberrant. He would approach this with the same methodical rigor he applied to the seismic data of unexplored trenches, searching for patterns, for logic, even in the seemingly illogical. He represented the sharp, rational edge of the investigation, a grounding force against the encroaching madness, a beacon of scientific methodology cast into the heart of an ancient, ineffable terror. His very presence would demand that the inexplicable somehow yield to the quantifiable, that the shadows retreat before the cold, hard light of scientific inquiry. The chilling silence of Blackwood Cove often masked the roaring echoes of a past that refused to die. The very air around the Merrill family seemed to vibrate with a centuries-old debt, a terrifying resonance that connected Silas's modern affliction to the audacious yet ultimately doomed ambition of his ancestor, Captain Alastair Marrow. His name, a whispered curse in their lineage, was inextricably linked to the distant, myth-shrouded waters of the Strait of Malacca. Alastair Marrow was no ordinary seaman. He was a man consumed by whispers, drawn by nautical charts that spoke of more than just trade routes. Legends of sunken empires, of treasures beyond earthly measure, and of guardian entities that slumbered in the abyssal dark had captured his imagination, particularly those tied to the treacherous, legend-laden Strait of Malacca. This narrow, vital waterway, a nexus of ancient trade and forgotten histories, promised not just riches, but revelations for those daring enough to seek them. It was here, in the early 19th century, that Captain Marrow, commanding the ill-fated brigantine the Siren's Lament, pursued not just gold, but something far more elusive, the fabled heart of the deep, an artifact rumored to unlock the secrets of oceanic time itself. His journal, cryptic fragments now jealously guarded by the Marrow family, spoke of an increasingly desperate voyage, battling storms that seemed to possess sentient wrath, and navigating through currents that defied all known charts. The entries grew feverish, referencing strange lights beneath the waves, impossible, cyclopean structures glimpsed in the inky blackness, and the unsettling sensation of being watched by something vast and ancient. Then, one fateful night, deep within a previously uncharted trench near the Andaman Sea, the Siren's Lament encountered something that transcended human understanding. Was it a physical ruin, an impossible city breathing cold, phosphorescent light from the crushing depths? Or was it something else entirely, a momentary tear in the fabric of reality, revealing a consciousness far older than humanity? The precise nature of that first contact remains shrouded in maddening ambiguity. Alastair's final coherent entries spoke not of treasure, but of a profound, soul-searing terror, a realization of something awakened. He wrote of a profound pressure, not of the ocean, but of an omnipresent gaze, of forms that writhed just beyond the veil of sight, and of a sound that resonated not in the ears, but in the very marrow of his bones. He returned to Blackwood Cove a changed man, haunted, his once vibrant eyes now holding the distant, vacant stare of one who had witnessed the unfathomable. He brought back no physical treasure, but an indelible mark, a spectral shadow that clung to him and, as history would reveal, to his descendants. This was the true inheritance, a subtle, insidious blight that began to manifest in unsettling ways, a chilling whisper in the bloodline, passed from generation to generation. What unseen entity had Captain Marrow truly disturbed in those unplumbed depths? And what terrifying bargain or cosmic imbalance had he unknowingly struck? Forever binding his lineage to the abyss, the oceanic adventure is just beginning. The ocean's whisper, once a comforting lullaby in Blackwood Cove, had curdled into a relentless, malevolent thrum within the Marrow lineage. Captain Alastair's return from the Strait of Malacca was not merely the end of a perilous voyage. It was the beginning of an insidious inheritance, a spiritual corrosion passed down through the generations, silently awaiting its full, terrifying bloom. For decades, the family endured its private torments, unexplained fevers, periods of profound melancholia, an unnatural aversion to sunlight, and an unsettling, almost magnetic pull towards the tumultuous, unforgiving sea. These were dismissed as the eccentricities of a family burdened by maritime tragedy, the lingering ghosts of lost men. But with Silas, the spectral became corporeal. The curse, once a distant shadow, now pressed its icy grip upon the living. His earliest symptoms were subtle, almost imperceptible. A child's peculiar fascination with tidal charts, a tendency to gaze fixedly at the churning gray of the Atlantic, as if deciphering an unseen language in its foam. Then came the unsettling dreams, not the fleeting phantoms of childhood sleep, but vivid, persistent visions of colossal, impossible structures sunken beneath impossible depths, of beings that defied biological classification, their forms shifting like liquid darkness, forms that haunted his waking hours. Ilara, his mother, watched with a growing dread, recognizing the grim echoes of whispered family lore. The true horror began with the episodes. Sudden, violent catatonia would seize him, his body rigid, his eyes wide and vacant, fixed on some unseen terror. When he emerged, a primal urgency would grip him, compelling his hands to move across any available surface: a worn wooden table, the damp sand of the beach, sketching intricate, terrifyingly accurate maps of submerged cities, of abyssal trenches, and the cyclopean outlines of creatures that belonged to a world alien to ours. These were not childish scribbles. They were precise, detailed cartography of impossible places, complete with bathymetric data and symbols no human had ever seen. And then the language, a guttural, ancient tongue, resonating with a primeval cadence, spoken with an authority that was not his own, a language of the deep, echoing from forgotten aeons, a dialect that defied all known linguistic analysis, chilling in its alien beauty. Medical science offered no solace, only blank stares and inadequate diagnoses. Psychosis, neurological anomaly, stress-induced fugue states. But Alara knew, deep in her marrow, that this was not a malady of the mind or body alone. This was the ancestral debt, the monstrous bargain struck by Captain Alistair Marrow resurfacing, demanding its due, slowly consuming her son from within. The Strait of Malacca, a place of historical intrigue and forgotten empires, now felt terrifyingly close, its ancient secrets manifesting in the tormented flesh of her son. What desperate, forbidden knowledge was encoded in Silas's tormented mind? And how does one fight a curse woven into the very fabric of one's lineage, when its origins lie lost in the crushing pressures of the deepest ocean? The desperate quest to understand Silas's affliction led Alara and her clandestine team down a labyrinthine path, not through hospital corridors or modern research labs, but into the dust-laden archives of forgotten maritime history. Their first substantive breakthrough arrived not from cutting-edge technology, but from the painstaking deciphering of Captain Alistair Marrow's personal logbooks and the obscure, annotated charts found secreted within the very foundations of the Blackwood Cove homestead. These weren't the meticulous records of a respectable merchantman. They were the frantic scribblings of a man consumed by an obsessive pursuit, charting a course far beyond the established trade routes of the Strait of Malacca. What Captain Marrow sought, and chillingly what he found, defied the conventional wisdom of his era. His voyage, cloaked in the guise of seeking new spice sources, was in truth a frantic, solitary quest for a legendary artifact whispered about only in the darkest corners of colonial ports and among the most ancient, isolated fishing communities along the Sunda Shelf. His logs spoke of an obsidian monolith, not carved by human hands, but seemingly formed by some geological process alien to our world, dredged from an abyssal trench known only to a few and feared by all. It was said to hum with an unearthly resonance, to pulse with a faint internal luminescence that waxed and waned with the oceanic tides. The cryptolinguist Dr. Eris Thorne, a man whose career had been shattered by his insistence on the existence of pre-human languages, became entranced by the cryptic symbols etched into Marrow's marginalia. They mirrored, with terrifying precision, the indecipherable patterns Silas now compulsively drew during his catatonic states. These were not the scripts of any known ancient civilization, but something far older, far more foundational, hinting at a language that predated conscious thought, a direct conduit to the subconscious, or perhaps to something beyond. The deep-sea cartographer, Elias Vance, a recluse, haunted by his own harrowing encounter with the deep, meticulously cross-referenced Marrow's coordinates with bathymetric data. He uncovered discrepancies, not errors, but deliberate obfuscations designed to conceal the true origin point of Marrow's find. The Strait of Malacca, a historically vital passage, was more than a maritime highway. It was a veiled gateway to a realm of geological anomalies and uncharted, unfathomable depths. It became clear that Marrow had not merely stumbled upon a relic. He had unearthed a conduit, an ancient, active presence. The logs chronicle the crew's rapid descent into madness, the unexplained deaths, the visions that plagued them, and finally, Captain Marrow's own desperate return to Blackwood Cove, not with a trove of riches, but with the monolith, shrouded and hidden. The first Marrow generation to touch the monolith, it seemed, was the first to taste the poison. The symptoms began subtly: a deepening melancholy, vivid nightmares, a strange affinity for the sea's darkest depths, before escalating with each passing year, each new birth. It was a debt incurred, not in gold, but in blood, a terrifying ledger of cosmic proportions. How could a single object, ancient though it may be, wield such an inexorable, generational power? What unspeakable pact did Alistair Marrow unknowingly, or perhaps knowingly, forge in the abyssal darkness? The silent dread that had long enveloped the Marrow household now began to claw at the very fabric of their reality. Manifest and undeniable, Silas's episodes, once sporadic, grew in both frequency and terrifying intensity. The young man, whose hands once knew only the calloused work of fishing nets, now moved with an unnatural, almost spastic grace, his body a conduit for something ancient and alien. Elara and Lyra found themselves living in a waking nightmare, each breath a silent prayer, each creak of the old house a potential harbinger of another descent into the abyss. One storm-racked night, the wind howled like a banshee through Blackwood Cove, and the ocean outside mirrored the torment within Silas. He convulsed, not in seizure, but in a grotesque dance, his limbs twisting into impossible angles, his eyes wide and fixed on unseen horrors. From his throat erupted a torrent of sound, a guttural, liquid language that was not of this earth, a chorus of clicks and whistles interwoven with a deep, resonant hum that vibrated through the very floorboards. It was the song of the crushing deep, of pressures no human body could withstand. And it echoed the mournful lament of the sea against the cliffs. As Elara held him, terrified, trying to ground him to their world, Silas's feverish hands tore at parchment, charcoal clutched tight, sketching with frantic, desperate energy. The drawing that emerged from this terrifying crucible was unlike anything he had produced before. It was not merely a map. It was a blueprint, startling in its precision. Across the vast expanse of the paper, rendered with an impossible cartographic accuracy, lay the skeletal remains of a colossal, sprawling structure, clearly artificial, its geometry defying terrestrial architecture. It was a submerged city, intricately detailed with impossible angles and cyclopean stonework, half buried in abyssal silt. But it was not the architecture that stole Ilara's breath. Etched repeatedly into the drawing, adorning gateways and monumental pillars, was a symbol she knew, a motif she had glimpsed in decaying journals, tucked away in the forgotten sea chest of Captain Alistair Marrow himself. A swirling spiral, not unlike a nautilus shell, but subtly broken, with a single, sharp barb at its center. This symbol, once dismissed as mere decorative flourish, now pulsed with a terrifying significance. It was too specific, too alien, and too intimately connected to their lineage to be coincidental. It suggested a terrifying truth. Captain Marrow had encountered not just a place of legend, but a civilization, a presence that etched its mark on the very consciousness of his descendants. This was no ordinary haunting. This was an active, inherited terror, a direct link from their ancestors' forgotten plunder to Silas's present agony. What did this symbol signify? What forgotten civilization did it belong to, and why had it branded the Marrow bloodline? Had Alistair Marrow truly disturbed the slumbering Titan, and was this spiraling mark the indelible signature of a cosmic debt finally coming due? The answers, Ilara knew with a chilling certainty, lay not in the medical textbooks of her world, but in the forbidden depths where their ancestor had dared to tread. The true nature of their inherited blight, and the terrifying entity behind it, had finally begun to reveal itself, not as a whisper, but as a scream etched in stone and blood. The isolation of Blackwood Cove, once a shield, now became a cage. Ilara Marrow, driven by a terror that transcended the natural world, finally broke the family's sacred vow of silence. Her desperation led her not to conventional medicine, which had already failed Silas, but to the fringes of academic obscurity. She sought out Professor Irissporn, a disgraced deep-sea cartographer whose career had imploded after championing theories of impossible underwater topographies, and Dr. Lena Petrova, an exiled cryptolinguist whose radical work on forgotten maritime ciphers was dismissed as pure delusion. Two minds cast out by mainstream science were Ilara's last desperate hope. Their arrival in Blackwood Cove was as clandestine as Ilara's desperate plea. The village, steeped in its own insular rhythm, barely registered the two outsiders who slipped in under the shroud of a persistent coastal fog. Thorn, with his salt-weathered face and eyes that seemed to hold the distant ocean's secrets, was immediately drawn to Silas's frantic drawings. They were not merely sketches. They were intricate, three-dimensional representations of structures that defied all known bathymetric charts, etched with preternatural precision. He saw impossible angles, geometric forms that whispered of an architecture far older than human civilization, submerged cities mirroring no known tectonic activity. He recognized echoes, faint and horrifying, of obscure maritime charts from the early American Republic, once dismissed as fevered dreams of mad hermits, now terrifyingly contextualized by Silas's visions. Petrova, meanwhile, began her meticulous work on Silas's utterances. The language he spoke during his catatonic states was a cacophony of guttural clicks, sibilant hisses, and melodic warbles, unlike any human tongue she had ever encountered. Yet, beneath the chaotic surface, she discerned a terrifying underlying structure, a syntax hinting at profound complexity. It was not a random babble. It was a coherent, albeit alien, form of communication. Her initial attempts to categorize its phonetics proved futile, forcing her to abandon conventional linguistic approaches and instead to listen not for words, but for patterns, for echoes of something ancient. She meticulously cross-referenced Silas's sounds with chilling accounts of early American whalers and privateers, who spoke of unnatural sounds from the deepest troughs, dismissed as mere madness or unknown marine life. The tension within the Marrow home intensified with the arrival of these strange allies. Silas's episodes grew more frequent, more violent. His drawings began to show not just the ruins, but also monstrous, chthonic figures, creatures of the abyssal plane, rendered with horrifying verisimilitude. The cartographer, tracing the impossible lines of the submerged cities, felt a chilling familiarity, as if these maps were not of Earth, or at least not of our Earth. And the cryptolinguist, listening to the alien lamentations, began to perceive not just a language, but a narrative, a terrifying tale of something awakened, something demanding. What ancient, unspeakable truth did Silas's afflicted mind now touch? A truth whispered from the forgotten ocean floor, demanding a price centuries overdue, a price perhaps paid by generations of American mariners lost to the deep. The silence of Blackwood Cove, usually a balm, had become a shroud, suffocating Elara Marrow as she welcomed two outsiders into her world of inherited dread. Dr. Vivian Holloway, a cryptolinguist whose career had imploded over unconventional theories of pre-human languages, arrived with an air of detached academic curiosity, quickly replaced by palpable unease. Her counterpart, Dr. Eris Thorne, a cartographer ostracized for his obsessive pursuit of apocryphal undersea topographies, brought with him a quiet intensity, his eyes perpetually scanning as if searching for contours in the air itself. Their shared disrepute, rather than a hindrance, became their shared bond, a desperate common ground in the face of the inexplicable. Silas Marrow's episodes provided their raw data. His tortured utterances, once dismissed as mere gibberish, were now meticulously recorded, transcribed, and analyzed by Holloway. She labored for days, her brow furrowed, a grim determination etched upon her face. The sounds defied conventional linguistics. They held a rhythm, a cadence, but no discernible phonemes or syntactic structures known to any human tongue, living or dead. Yet there were echoes, faint reverberations of primordial guttural sounds, reminiscent of what some fringe theories attributed to the earliest, most isolated human settlements, or perhaps something far older, predating recognized civilization. Holloway's initial hypothesis, whispered in the hushed confines of the Marrow home, was chilling. The language wasn't just ancient, it was alien. Not in the cosmic sense, but alien to the tapestry of human evolution, a lexicon forged in an abyssal crucible. Could it be a re-emergent fragment of a language lost to the very first cataclysms? Or even a speech pattern from a species that evolved outside the terrestrial surface world we understand? This was no mere dialect, but a fundamental reordering of communication. Meanwhile, Dr. Thorne meticulously examined Silas's impossible maps, drawn in feverish, trance-like states, sometimes on the back of old tide charts, sometimes directly onto the splintered floorboards of his room. They depicted a network of submerged structures unlike anything catalogued by modern oceanography. They were not mere geological formations. These were architectural blueprints, vast, sprawling cities carved from unseen rock, adorned with symbols that seemed to rive with their own dark energy. The depths indicated on these maps were staggering, plunging far beyond the reach of human submersibles, into regions of the abyssal plane only theorized to exist. Thorne, a man who had dedicated his life to the precise mapping of the ocean floor, found no fault in their internal consistency. The angles were perfect, the scale precise, the interconnections logical, yet utterly fantastical. He traced contours of towering spires and sprawling tentacled complexes, all anchored to locations that, if real, would rewrite every known geological and historical atlas. What was most disturbing was not just the impossibility of these structures, but their uncanny resonance with fragmented, almost mythical accounts found in the deepest, most obscure corners of American maritime lore. Tales of phantom islands that appeared and vanished, of strange currents that pulled ships into impossible voids, or even whispers among whaling crews of colossal, non-Euclidean structures glimpsed through the churning waters of forgotten storms. Were Silas's drawings merely the ravings of a sick mind, or were they a terrifying cartography of a world that humanity had deliberately, perhaps rightfully, forgotten? The line between madness and revelation had begun to blur. Each new symbol, each guttural utterance from Silas, chipped away at the perceived reality of their world. A horrifying question began to form, a cold dread seeping into the core of their investigative team. Was this a glimpse into a primordial past, or a horrifying blueprint for a future that was already here? Stay with us, because what we are about to reveal may change your perception of the oceans forever. Ilara Marrow, cornered by a terror that gnawed at the very fabric of her family, made a desperate wager. She reached beyond the insular confines of Blackwood Cove, extending feelers into the obscure, often ridiculed peripheries of academic inquiry. Her chosen allies were not conventional scholars, but figures cast out from the mainstream. Individuals whose brilliance was often overshadowed by unorthodox methods or controversial theories. Dr. Ayres Thorne, a disgraced deep-sea cartographer whose career imploded after advocating for anomalous, impossible geomorphic structures in the Pacific abyssal plains, carried the weight of a discredited prophet. Alongside him, Professor Lena Petrova, a brilliant cryptolinguist, exiled from her university for her obsessive pursuit of pre-human language patterns in ancient, forgotten ciphers, embodied a mind unburdened by academic dogma. Their arrival in Blackwood Cove, under the shroud of Maine's relentless mist, felt less like an intervention and more like the gathering of a desperate, final council before the inevitable. Their first encounter with Silas was a descent into an alien landscape. He lay upon his bed, body rigid, eyes fixed on an unseen horror. From his lips, a guttural, fluid cascade of sounds, utterly devoid of familiar phonetics, poured forth. Petrova, a woman accustomed to the logic puzzles of dead tongues, felt an unsettling coldness grip her. This was not merely unknown. It defied linguistic principles, yet possessed a terrible rhythmic cadence, like the mournful echo of crushing depths. Thorne, meanwhile, meticulously photographed Silas's feverish drawings. The maps were a kaleidoscope of impossible geometry, fractured coastlines that mirrored no known landmass, and colossal submerged edifices spiraling into abyssal trenches. Yet even in their chaos, a chilling precision emerged. Each line, each contour, whispered of a terrifying internal consistency. The cartographer traced patterns that defied geological explanation, pointing to mountain ranges sunken thousands of feet below the surface and trenches that plunged far deeper than the Mariana. But it was the recurring symbols, intricate and alien, that truly arrested his attention. They were glyphs that seemed to writhe, alive with some dark primeval energy, hinting at a lost script. Petrova, working in parallel, began to discern a repetition in Silas's guttural utterances, a sequence of sounds that recurred with the chilling regularity of a curse. As she cross-referenced her findings with Thorne's visual data, a horrifying connection began to coalesce. Certain sounds, certain rhythmic intonations from Silas's trance, seemed to resonate with the visual flow of the glyphs Thorn had isolated. It was an echoing, a call and response between sound and symbol, a language not written on stone, but somehow etched into the very consciousness of Silas Marrow. The true breakthrough, however, came not from academic deduction, but from a whisper of the forgotten past. Among Captain Alastair Marrow's meticulously kept, albeit fragmented, logbooks, discovered hidden beneath floorboards in the old Marrow house, their pages brittle with age and sea salt, Thorn found a series of rough sketches. They were crude, fearful renditions, depicting the very same impossible structure Silas now drew, and strangely, the same writhing glyphs. But the captain's notes offered a chilling context. He referred to them not as structures, but as ancient safeguards and the marks of the Leviathan's deep slumber, encountered during his most perilous and ultimately fateful foray into the uncharted waters bordering the Strait of Malacca. The Marrow curse, long a terrifying family secret, was not merely a spiritual metaphor. It was a tangible, terrifying echo of Captain Marrow's direct interaction with something ancient and immeasurably powerful. The first true contact, it seemed, was not with Silas, but with the haunting specter of his ancestors' transgression, reaching across a century of silence to claim its due. What was this Leviathan's deep slumber, and what price had Captain Marrow truly paid to awaken it? Stay with us, because what we are about to reveal may change your perception of the oceans forever. The Marrow curse was not merely a whispered legend, a haunting passed through generations, a distant echo from the Strait of Malacca. It was a tangible affliction, a biological echo of a monstrous bargain, slowly, insidiously manifesting itself within the very bloodline, asserting its ancient claims. For Silas, the descent began subtly, a gradual dimming of the light behind his eyes, a strange, profound withdrawal from the familiar world of Blackwood Cove. First, an unusual fatigue and unnerving lethargy that medical professionals, caught in the comfortable confines of their known science, dismissed as adolescent angst. Then came the night terrors, more vivid and visceral than any nightmare. He would wake screaming, not from fear, but from the profound, guttural despair, a sound that seems to tear at the very soul. His utterances were in a language utterly unknown to Alara or Lyra, a sequence of harsh, clicking phonemes and impossible rolling vowels that seemed to scrape against the very fabric of reality. Where had these alien sounds, these ancient syllables, been imprinted? These episodes grew in intensity and frequency, consuming his nights. His sleep became a fractured landscape of guttural incantations and violent thrashing, his body contorting as if battling unseen spectral adversaries. Yet it was the waking hours that held the true creeping horror. Moments of profound disassociation would seize him, where Silas's gaze would drift, unfocused, distant, lost in a vision only he could perceive. His hands, seemingly independent of his will, would begin to move, not in a tremor of illness, but with an almost ritualistic precision, reaching compulsively for paper, for charcoal, for anything that could capture the impossible visions that seemed to possess him from within. What emerged from his feverish hand was not the innocent doodles of a boy, but an architect's blueprint for impossibly vast, cyclopean structures, submerged cities of alien geometry, temples of obsidian and coral, colossal columns rising from abyssal plains, all rendered with an unnerving accuracy for places that should not exist in any known terrestrial geography. And alongside these, the creatures, not the known fauna of the deep, but leviathans of impossible scale and grotesque beauty, their forms defying terrestrial biology, their eyes holding an ancient, malevolent intelligence. How could a boy from a remote fishing village, with no access to such esoteric knowledge, conceive of these impossible landscapes and their monstrous denizens? Ilara, with a mother's fierce, animalistic desperation, sought every medical explanation, every logical diagnosis available in the limited reach of their coastal community. But doctors found nothing, only a profound, inexplicable neurological anomaly. The tests revealed a brain activity pattern utterly unique, bordering on the impossible, as if a deeper primal consciousness, an abyssal intelligence, had begun to stir and awaken within Silas. Was the Strait of Malacca not just a distant memory, but a conduit, an open wound through which something ancient and terrible was bleeding into their present reality, corrupting the very lineage? The whispers of the curse were no longer abstract fears, no longer mere family lore. They had found their voice, and through Silas, they were beginning to paint a map to a horror far older than any human history, a map leading into an abyss from which few return, and where the line between dream and waking nightmare had utterly dissolved. What unspeakable truth lay hidden beneath the impossible cities of Silas's tormented mind, waiting to be unearthed, and what price would Ilara pay to uncover it? The flickering lantern light cast long, dancing shadows across the ancient parchment, illuminating a truth far more disturbing than any pirate's tale. As Ilara, the disgraced cartographer, and the exiled cryptolinguist delved deeper into Captain Alastair Merrow's meticulously kept, yet maddeningly obscure journals, a pattern began to emerge, chilling in its consistency. Silas's chaotic, yet intricate drawings of cyclopean structures beneath the waves, once dismissed as fevered hallucinations, found echoes in Merrow's meticulous, almost fanatical, charting of the Strait of Malacca. But it wasn't just the contours of submerged landscapes that aligned. It was the symbols, the script, the very fabric of an impossible, forgotten language. The cryptolinguist, Dr. Eris Thorne, a man whose career had been shattered by his pursuit of pre-human linguistics, recognized fragments from Silas's utterances, not just words, but complete, coherent phrases, phrases that spoke of thresholds, of guardians, and of a binding oath. These were not the ramblings of a sick boy. They were transmissions, chillingly precise. And as Dr. Thorne painstakingly cross-referenced these with Merrow's annotations, cryptic notes scribbled in margins, astronomical alignments that defied contemporary knowledge, and references to the architects of the Azure Veil, a monumental, terrifying discovery began to coalesce. Captain Merrow's voyage was no mere treasure hunt. It was a calculated, deliberate expedition to locate something far more profound and dangerous. A gateway. His logbooks, once seemingly filled with nautical trivia and personal musings, now revealed themselves as a dark compendium of esoteric lore, a testament to an obsession that transcended simple greed. Buried within the prosaic entries of sail repairs and weather reports were detailed accounts of specific coordinates, not for gold, but for anomalous abyssal rifts, described as unseen wounds in the ocean floor, humming with an ancient, resonant energy. And alongside these, the cartographer, Dr. Lena Hansen, a woman whose keen eye for anomalies had cost her everything, found what she dared not believe: incredibly precise hydrographic charts, hand-drawn by Merrow, depicting not natural formations, but colossal geometric structures beneath the waves of the Malacca Strait. Structures that, even with today's advanced sonar, remain utterly unmappable. One entry, dated October 17th, 1898, stood out with chilling clarity. Marrow described a descent into a specific abyss, guided by stars not visible from the surface, navigating by a phosphorescent current. He wrote of encountering the silent sentinels, colossal, unmoving figures carved from a stone unknown to geology, guarding a monumental archway. And beyond the archway, he spoke of a luminous void from which emanated a sound that rewrote the very essence of human thought. This was no fanciful prose. The detailed descriptions, the precise measurements of the sentinels, and the exact geographical coordinates Marrow provided, aligned almost perfectly with the most elaborate of Silas's drawings, right down to the number of limbs on the depicted guardians and the strange, star-like patterns etched into the stone. How could a boy, confined to a small fishing village in Maine, draw something so precisely documented over a century ago in a remote corner of Southeast Asia? The implications were staggering. Captain Marrow had not just stumbled upon a forgotten civilization. He had actively sought it out, armed with knowledge that should not have existed. He was not a victim of circumstance, but an orchestrator of a profound, calamitous encounter. And the curse now bleeding into the Marrow bloodline was not merely retribution for theft, but the agonizing consequence of a sacred violation, a breach of an ancient barrier. What did Captain Marrow take? Or perhaps, what did he awaken from beyond that luminous void? And what dark covenant did he inadvertently forge that now claimed his descendants as its gruesome payment? The answers lay further down, in the inky blackness of history, waiting. Join us as we dive into the oceanic depths of Captain Marrow's true legacy. The episodes grew in frequency, each more harrowing than the last. Silas would seize, his young body racked by an invisible torment, his eyes rolling back to reveal whites stark against his pallor. From his throat, sounds would erupt. Not screams of pain, but a chilling, rhythmic guttural chant that seemed to echo the very pulse of the deep ocean. It was a language utterly alien, devoid of human warmth or recognizable phonetics. A symphony of grinding kelp and shifting rock, of unseen currents, dragging lost things across the abyssal plains. Elara, helpless, could only cradle him, feeling the unnatural tremors that coursed through his frame, knowing instinctively that this was no ordinary sickness. This was something ancient stirring within her son. Then came the drawings. Not sketches, but intricate, almost architectural renderings, emerging from Silas's feverish hands with an unnerving precision. He would scroll them on any available surface. Napkins, the back of old fishing logs, even the condensation on a window pane. Complex geometries that defied earthly design. They depicted colossal structures, half buried beneath sediments, adorned with symbols no human civilization had ever charted. Intertwined with these submerged ruins were impossible creatures, beings of immense scale, with bioluminescent organs and forms that seemed to defy the very laws of biology. Their eyes holding a terrifying ancient sentience. These were not the whimsical creations of a child's imagination. They were visions, disturbingly real, chillingly precise, from a realm utterly alien to our own. The local doctor, a kind man who had known Silas since birth, could offer no diagnosis beyond a vague neurological disorder. His prescriptions proved useless against the relentless assault on Silas's mind and body. The family's isolation, a shield against the town's wary glances and their own secret, began to buckle under the strain. Ilera understood with a crushing certainty that conventional science had reached its limit. This was not a medical crisis, but a confrontation with the very lineage of their pain, a terror inherited, now actively asserting its claim. The Marrows were not merely haunted, they were being consumed. The whispered tales of Captain Alistair Marrow, once distant echoes, now resounded with terrifying clarity in the quiet, storm-battered house. The debt he accrued, the entity he disturbed in the abyssal darkness of the Strait of Malacca, was not a metaphor. It was a living, breathing blight, manifesting in the raw, agonizing reality of Silas's suffering. The weight of generations of silence, the unspoken terror that bound them, had to be broken. Ilara knew she had to seek answers beyond the shores of Blackwood Cove, beyond the veil of their family's guarded history. She had heard whispers of a disgraced cartographer, a man driven by obsessions as profound as Captain Marrow's, and of a cryptolinguist, an outcast in academic circles, who delved into the impossible. The very act of reaching out, of exposing their wound to the light, was an act of desperate courage. It was a gamble against an ancient adversary, a silent war declared not on an external foe, but on the very blood that flowed through their veins. What secrets would these outsiders unearth in the strange, guttural utterances of her son, and in the impossible blueprints he drew from the depths of a cursed sleep? The journey into the unknown had just begun, and the currents were pulling them into an ever darker abyss. The cryptolinguist, Dr. Eris Thorne, a man whose academic career was shattered by his insistence on ancient languages predating known human settlements, found himself staring at Silas's frantic scrawls with a mixture of dread and exhilaration. What Silas had transcribed during his most violent episodes were not mere gibberish, but fragments of a coherent, albeit alien, linguistic system. It bore no resemblance to any terrestrial language, living or dead. Yet Thorne began to identify patterns, recurring glyphs that seemed to denote specific concepts: deep water, sacrifice, awakening, debt. These were not words in the traditional sense, but ideograms, symbols laden with immense, terrifying meaning, echoing whispers from a time before humanity charted its first currents. Meanwhile, the disgraced cartographer, Dr. Evelyn Reed, her reputation ruined by her pursuit of impossible, unmappable anomalies in the abyssal plains, was making equally chilling progress. Silas's maps, initially dismissed as feverish delusions, were becoming eerily precise. They depicted bathymetric contours that did not exist on any modern chart. Yet, when cross-referenced with archaic naval archives and forgotten sounding logs from the 19th century American mercantile fleet, Reed began to find ghostly echoes. These were not simply fantastical landscapes. They were representations of a submerged topography, a geography alien and ancient, yet undeniably real. The most disturbing recurring feature was a vast, sunken citadel, its architecture unlike anything known to humanity, always located in proximity to the elusive Strait of Malacca. The connection was becoming undeniable. Captain Alistair Marrow's journals, meticulously preserved in the family's attic and unearthed by Ilara, spoke in veiled terms of the great weight he brought back, a price exacted for seeing what was not meant for human eyes. His entries grew increasingly erratic, filled with sketches resembling Silas's later work, spirals, strange geometries, and fragmented symbols that now, through Thorne's nascent understanding, began to whisper of an ancient pact, a transgression against something far older and more powerful than any earthly empire. The journals detailed a specific location, a deep trench near the forgotten shipping lanes of the Malacca Strait, where Alastair had encountered a phenomenon that defied description. He described a pulsating light, a melody that resonated not in the ears, but in the bones, and the sudden, terrifying realization that he was not merely observing, but being observed in return. The symptoms Alastair described in his final, chilling entries, the profound exhaustion, the hallucinatory visions of impossible creatures, the speaking in tongues, the uncontrollable drawing, mirrored Silas's own rapidly deteriorating condition with horrifying fidelity. This was not a coincidence. It was a legacy, a direct inheritance of a cosmic debt. Ilara watched her son, racked by convulsions, his young body a canvas for an ancient language, and understood the terrifying truth. The past was not merely a story, but a living, breathing curse, actively claiming its due from the Marrow lineage, a family deeply rooted in America's own maritime history. The questions multiplied, each answer spawning a dozen more. What had Captain Marrow truly unearthed from the Malaccan deep? What was this ancient bargain? And what terrible price had been agreed upon for generations to come? And most terrifyingly, was there any way to sever this monstrous tether before it consumed Silas entirely? The oceanic adventure, it seemed, was only now truly beginning to reveal its terrifying face. The fragile peace within Blackwood Cove had shattered. Silas Marrow's episodes were no longer confined to moments of quiet delirium. They now seized him with a terrifying, unpredictable ferocity. His body would convulse, his eyes rolling back to reveal only white, and from his lips would pour forth a torrent of guttural sounds, a language utterly alien, echoing the ocean's vast, indifferent roar. Medical professionals, bewildered and helpless, had retreated, leaving Ilara to confront the escalating nightmare alone. The truth of her son's plight, too monstrous for conventional diagnosis. Yet amidst the terror, the tireless work of the disgraced cartographer and the exiled cryptolinguist yielded fragments, each more disturbing than the last. The cryptolinguist, Dr. Eris Thorne, a man whose career had been undone by his pursuit of pre-human linguistic anomalies, meticulously transcribed Silas's ravings. What he discovered was not a known human tongue, nor even an ancient dialect, but a structured lexicon bearing uncanny similarities to sonic patterns recorded from the abyssal trenches, deep-sea hydrothermal vents, and most chillingly, the inexplicable acoustic anomalies detected decades ago near the very coordinates Captain Alastair Marrow had logged in his final desperate entries in the Strait of Malacca. This was no earthly speech, but something woven from the very fabric of the deep. Simultaneously, the cartographer Amelia Vance, haunted by her own past professional downfall, meticulously overlaid Silas's impossible drawings onto bathymetric charts of the strait. Her findings were equally unsettling. Silas was not sketching fantasy. He was depicting structures, colossal and impossibly intricate, that bore no resemblance to any known human architecture. These weren't ruins of a forgotten surface civilization. They were utterly submerged, their scale defying any conventional engineering. One particular recurring symbol, a spiraling vortex encompassing a barbed trident, appeared repeatedly, precisely where Captain Marrow's logs mentioned the eye of the storm, and an unnatural calm, preceding his crew's descent into madness. The implications were staggering and horrifying. Silas was not merely cursed. He was becoming a conduit, a living receptor for an intelligence so profound, so ancient, that it transcended all human understanding of time and geology. The patterns, the symbols, the language, They hinted at a presence not just old, but other, an entity or a collective consciousness that predated humanity, slumbering in the lightless depths. What kind of debt could bind a family across centuries to such an unfathomable power? The question gnawed at Alara. Was Silas not sick, but rather communicating? And if so, what unspeakable truth was attempting to surface through the fragile vessel of her son's mind? The answers, if they could even be called that, were not providing clarity, but an ever-deepening abyss of cosmic dread. The terror in Blackwood Cove was not just a historical echo, it was a living, growing entity asserting its claim. What would happen when its whispers became shouts? And what further horrors would emerge from the depths of Silas's tormented psyche as the connection grew stronger? Silas Marrow's descent continued, his episodes growing more frequent, more violent. The unearthly language he uttered began to coalesce. The cacophony slowly yielding faint rhythms and repeating phonemes under the relentless scrutiny of Dr. Eris Thorne, the cryptolinguist. Thorne, with his gaunt face and eyes that held the ghosts of forgotten alphabets, toiled ceaselessly, filling reams of paper with arcane symbols and phonetic transcriptions. He spoke of patterns, of impossible glottal stops and vowel shifts that defied any known human linguistic evolution. This was not a forgotten dialect, he asserted with a trembling conviction. This was something other, a language not evolved from the human tongue, but perhaps alongside it or from a source unimaginably older. Meanwhile, Dr. Lena Petrova, the disgraced cartographer, became a spectral presence in the Marrow home. Her lamplit nights spent hunched over ancient hydrographic surveys, faded admiralty charts, and the bewildering scrawls Silas produced in his fugue states. She hunted for congruences, for any point where his fantastical depictions of submerged cities and gargantuan creatures might intersect with known, or even rumored, oceanic topography. The Strait of Malacca, a labyrinth of treacherous currents and unplumbed abysses, became her obsession. Days blurred into weeks, then a flicker. A faint, almost imperceptible anomaly on a deep-sea bathymetric scan from a clandestine survey, one that had been dismissed as instrument error, began to echo the impossible geometry of Silas's spontaneous architecture. Not a city carved by human hands, but something organic, titanic, growing out of the abyssal plain like a coral formation of monumental scale, yet possessing an unnerving symmetry. The pieces, once disparate fragments of madness and myth, were beginning to interlock with chilling precision. The first contact wasn't a meeting, it was an echo, a signal bleeding across time and unimaginable distances. Silas was not merely dreaming. He was a receiver, his mind an unwilling conduit for an intelligence that transcended human understanding, an entity whose whispers were etched into the very deep. What form did this intelligence take? And what unspeakable bargain had Captain Alistair Marrow truly struck in the suffocating darkness of those ancient waters, to incur such a terrifying, enduring debt? The answers were beginning to surface, and with them, a dread far greater than any pirate's curse. The clandestine investigation, initiated by Alara Marrow with a desperate hope, had peeled back layers of historical silence, revealing not just the chilling trajectory of Captain Alistair's ill-fated voyage, but also the subtle, insidious ways the past continued to bleed into the present. The cryptolinguist, Dr. Eris Thorne, initially focused on the incomprehensible scrawls and utterances of young Silas, began to notice something far more unsettling. The patterns in Silas's delirious maps, once dismissed as random phantasmagoria, were starting to coalesce, hinting at a geography that defied known bathymetry, yet mirrored descriptions found in obscure maritime logs dating back centuries. But these were internal echoes, a private torment confined within the Marrow household. What emerged next were the first anomalies, external and undeniable, casting a pervasive, chilling pall over the already somber landscape of Blackwood Cove. It began subtly with the sea itself. Fishermen, descendants of generations who had plied these very waters with an almost instinctual knowledge, reported strange, unprecedented shifts in the currents, inexplicable eddy formations that defied all known tidal charts and lunar cycles. Their nets, once brimming with familiar, predictable catches, now came up strangely empty, or worse, yielded species never before seen in these cold North Atlantic waters. Deep-sea creatures grotesquely bioluminescent, their forms alien, their very presence at such shallow depths a biological impossibility. The once predictable migrations of local marine life faltered, replaced by an eerie, unnatural quiet. The lobsters, the very lifeblood of the cove, seemed to vanish. Their traps empty, day after day, their customary scavenging grounds deserted. A profound sense of loss, both economic and spiritual, began to grip the community. Then came the sounds. A low, resonant hum, often heard in the dead of night, seeming to emanate from the ocean floor itself, vibrating through the very bedrock beneath Blackwood Cove. It was a sound that defied categorization, neither natural nor mechanical, but possessing an ancient, almost primordial quality that stirred something primal, an ancestral dread in those who heard it. Some claimed it was the mournful cry of the deep, others a forgotten language whispering from the abyss, a preternatural warning. The disgraced cartographer, Dr. Evelyn Reed, her maps once focused on the three-dimensional rendering of known ocean floors, now found herself charting anomalies not just in depth but in sound. Her hydrophones, deployed secretly along the coastline, recorded pulses of energy, rhythmic and complex, unlike any sonar signature known to science. These patterns, she discovered, bore an uncanny, terrifying resemblance to the frequencies embedded within Silas's cryptic utterances, as painstakingly decoded by Thorne. The correlation was chilling. Silas's internal torment was somehow manifesting, or perhaps being amplified by, an external force resonating from the very ocean that cradled Blackwood Cove. The Marrow family's curse, it seemed, was not merely a spiritual blight passed through blood, but a physical one, an energetic congruence with something vast and ancient lying just beyond the veil of human perception. Was the Strait of Malacca curse a localized horror that Captain Alistair had unleashed, or had he, in his greed, brought something back that was now actively calling to its source, warping the very fabric of their local reality? The unsettling silence of the sea, the alien creatures, the guttural hum from the deep, these were not mere coincidences. They were symptoms of a growing, encroaching dread. What precisely were these anomalies heralding? And what was the true nature of the connection between a small, cursed family in coastal Maine and the unfathomable depths beneath the Strait of Malacca, a world away? The journey into Captain Marrow's past had been a labyrinth, until Dr. Eris Thorne, the cryptolinguist, made a breakthrough. For weeks, Thorne meticulously analyzed the strange symbols Silas etched, initially dismissed as delirium. Yet Thorne recognized fragments, echoes of an ancient script. His research led him to a forgotten appendix in a rare historical account of 19th century maritime expeditions in Southeast Asia. Within its pages were illustrations depicting similar glyphs, attributed to a reclusive, uncontacted tribe rumored to dwell on a remote island near the Malacca Strait, a place known only as the Silent Atoll. The true revelation came when Dr. Thorne cross-referenced these glyphs with obscure annotations discovered by Dr. Evelyn Reed, the cartographer, within Captain Merrow's personal coded logbook. This wasn't merely a log of routes. It was a deeply personal, increasingly frantic record. Tucked between entries detailing storms were cryptic drawings of submerged structures, cyclopean in scale, adorned with these newly identified symbols. Merrow's own hand had sketched vast, sunless temples, their architecture defying all known human design, predating any recorded civilization. Beside these drawings, in Merrow's shaking script, were phrases in the ancient language Thorne identified. "The Watchers are awake. The debt must be paid." This was it. Not just a legend, but tangible evidence from the captain himself, directly linking his voyage to an undiscovered, submerged civilization in the Strait of Malacca. The source of Silas's torment, these impossible maps, now echoed in the historical record. Captain Merrow hadn't merely plundered artifacts. He had stumbled upon, and perhaps desecrated, sacred sites of immense power. The Watchers. What exactly were these entities? Ancient guardians of abyssal ruins, or something far more abstract? The discovery provided chilling clarity, yet plunged them deeper into a darkness more profound. The Merrow family's curse was not born of mere greed, but of an unimaginable cosmic transgression. Are you ready to join us on this journey into the unknown depths? The ancestral presence haunting the Merrow lineage ceased to be unseen. It bled into the tangible world. Blackwood Cove faced unnerving phenomena. High tides revealing strange deposits. Fishermen reporting grotesque, mythical deep-sea creatures. But within the Merrow household, the manifestation was terrifyingly clear. Silas's episodes escalated to horrifying waking nightmares. He thrashed violently, body contorting unnaturally, skin translucent, veins visible like a dark web. The unknown language he spoke became a chilling, rhythmic chant. Alara witnessed the impossible. From Silas's eyes, bioluminescent fluid, abyssal phosphorescence, began to weep, tracing luminous trails before evaporating. A stinging scent of brine, metallic, ancient, filled the room. No mere illness. It was invasion, physical transformation. A dual breakthrough solidified the horror. Dr. Eris Thorne, cartographer, cross-referenced Silas's impossible drawings. From Captain Merrow's hidden sea chest, Thorne found fragmented, hand-drawn maps. These obsessive sketches in panicked script precisely mirrored Silas's cyclopean ruins from Merrow's Strait of Malacca voyage. Simultaneously, Dr. Vivian Holloway, cryptolinguist, analyzed Silas's vocalizations, isolating a phonetic alphabet unlike any human tongue. Recurring resonant sound. 1. Repeated during violent seizures, held terrifying resonance, the precise spectrographic waveform of a leviathan's song. A low-frequency hum from the deepest abysses, matching Captain Merrow's hidden logbook anomaly, once dismissed. The implications were catastrophic, defying all logic. Silas was not dreaming. He was seeing, experiencing, perhaps communicating, through a direct, hereditary conduit from his ancestors' transgression. The curse was not spiritual. It was the abyss, we are often told, is a place of profound silence, a void where light and sound are swallowed whole. But what if that silence is merely the absence of our understanding? A veil over a communication far older, far more intricate than anything known to humanity. This unnerving question began to plague Alara Marrow and her clandestine team as the cryptolinguist, Dr. Eris Thorne, presented his chilling hypothesis. Silas's utterances, those tortured, guttural sounds that had seemed random, incomprehensible babbling, were in fact a language, not human, not even terrestrial in origin, Thorne proposed. It was a complex resonant speech pattern, a living relic from a time before our species walked the earth, echoing the very pulse of the deep ocean. He theorized that Silas was not merely speaking, but channeling, a direct conduit to a consciousness that transcended conventional biology. The language itself, he suggested, was not just a means of communication, but a form of energetic transfer, a direct imprint of thought and memory. Every syllable, every drawn-out vowel, pulsed with an ancient alien intelligence, an intelligence that seemed to have patiently awaited its moment. A moment triggered by Captain Alistair Marrow's violation. Simultaneously, the disgraced cartographer, Dr. Evelyn Reed, brought forth her own disturbing corroborations. Silas's impossible maps, initially dismissed as fevered delirium, contained precise bathymetric data, outlining structures and geological formations that defied conventional understanding of the ocean floor. Reed, utilizing obscure, unclassified sonar data from forgotten Cold War expeditions and cross-referencing them with anomalous readings from deep-sea probes, began to piece together a terror. The ruins Silas depicted were not speculative. They existed. They lay nestled in the abyssal plains of the Strait of Malacca, a sprawling, non-Euclidean architecture unlike any human construction. This was not merely a lost city. It was something else entirely. The structures seemed to breathe, to pulse with a faint non-thermal energy signature. And within these submerged geometries, Silas's maps hinted at something far more disturbing than mere ruins. Vast, cavernous spaces, almost like living chambers, dedicated to an unknown purpose. Was this the domain Captain Marrow had stumbled upon? The very locus of the unspeakable power he had awakened. The chilling implication was clear. The entity, or entities, responsible for the Marrow curse were not merely ancient, but active. Their influence reaching across centuries and continents, tethered to the very bloodline that had dared to disturb their abyssal slumber. What unspeakable knowledge, what horrific power was encoded within Silas's very being, and what terrors might it unleash if fully manifested? The chilling truth began to coalesce, not in ancient texts or forgotten charts, but in the accelerating degradation of Silas Marrow himself. His episodes, once sporadic, became a terrifying, almost rhythmic pulse in the heart of Blackwood Cove. Each convulsion more violent, each pronouncement in that guttural oceanic tongue more insistent. Ilara watched, helpless, as the sun she knew began to fray at the edges, his very essence seemingly consumed by an alien will. It was Dr. Thorne, the cryptolinguist, whose weary eyes, now perpetually shadowed, first pieced together the fragments of Silas's tormented speech. He recognized patterns, not of human language, but of something far older, predating known linguistic structures, yet possessing an undeniable internal logic. It was not mere babbling, Thorne revealed, but a lament, a demand, and a chilling promise. Simultaneously, Dr. Reed, the cartographer, working feverishly with Silas's impossible sketches, found a terrifying convergence. The intricate lines, once dismissed as fevered delirium, weren't just maps of submerged ruins. They were, in fact, incredibly precise depictions of tidal currents, abyssal trenches, and geothermal vents, all converging on a single impossible point in the deepest, most unexplored sector of the Strait of Malacca. But more than that, interweaved with these geological formations were symbols, recurring motifs that echoed those found in the Merrow family's hidden journals. Symbols Alastair Merrow had obsessively sketched, alongside feverish warnings of a debt beyond reckoning and the Great Claim. The combined research painted a picture far more sinister than a simple curse. Silas was not merely afflicted, he was being activated. The language he spoke was not just an echo of the ancient entity, but its direct voice, articulating the long-awaited price of Alastair Merrow's transgressions. The maps, in turn, were not just locations, but the very pathways to fulfilling that monstrous bargain. The blight in the Merrow bloodline was not an arbitrary punishment, but a carefully orchestrated mechanism, a slow, generational preparation for a grander, more terrifying extraction. What ancient pact had Captain Merrow truly made? What forbidden knowledge had he stolen to incur such a precise, inescapable debt? What was the great claim that now sought to manifest through the very flesh and blood of his descendants? The ale in Blackwood Cove, already heavy with brine and decay, seemed to thicken, pressing down on the small, isolated house. The ocean's roar outside was no longer a lament, but a hungry growl. And the spectral ships on the shore seemed to lean in, their empty frames witnessing the unfolding horror. Silas's skin, once vibrant, began to take on a pallid, almost translucent quality, his eyes sinking deeper, his gaze fixed on an unseen horizon. The terror was no longer abstract, it was physical, consuming. But creature, the entity, was not merely haunting them from afar. It was reaching tangibly into their reality, through Silas, through the very fabric of their cursed lineage. Could the Merrows truly be a conduit? A living sacrifice for something ancient and unfathomable? Stay with us, because what we are about to reveal may change your perception of the oceans forever. What unimaginable payment did the Strait of Malacca demand? And what final piece of the bargain was Silas now destined to deliver? The language Silas speaks, Dr. Thorne began, his voice a low, gravitas-laden hum, is not merely dead but primordial. It predates human civilization as we understand it. We've traced its echoes, not in archaeological digs, but in the fevered scribblings of forgotten American mariners. Men who, much like Captain Merrow, pushed the boundaries of known exploration in the early 19th century. These aren't well-documented historical facts, but suppressed entries, often attributed to delirium or madness, hidden within private logs of vessels that disappeared or returned irrevocably changed from the Pacific Rim, specifically the Strait of Malacca. He laid out aged, brittle pages, facsimiles of log entries, alongside Silas's frantic drawings. Look closely at these symbols, the intricate geometries. Silas isn't drawing ruins. He's mapping something far older, far more fundamental. These aren't architectural plans, but patterns of energy, signatures of a presence viewing our surface world as an intrusion. The ruins he sees are not structures in the conventional sense, but the eroded remains of a pre-human understanding, an ancient order disrupted. Alara's breath caught, a cold dread seeping into her bones. "What are you saying?" "We are saying," the cartographer Evelyn Reed interjected, her pragmatic voice tinged with awe, "that Captain Marrow did not merely steal artifacts. He breached a veil. He did not just find forgotten wealth. He awakened a forgotten claim. This curse is not a random affliction, nor a simple haunting. It's a reclamation. The entity he disturbed in the abyssal depths beneath the Strait of Malacca views his lineage as an extension of his transgression. Silas is not merely sick. He is being drawn back, pulled into an incomprehensible debt that transcends human law, human time." Thorne picked up the thread, his gaze unwavering. "The grand narrative of American expansion, our drive to explore and claim, has a shadowed counterpart. Beyond official manifests and patriotic declarations, there were those who sought to exploit not just new lands, but new dimensions of reality. Captain Marrow's voyage, a seemingly singular, greedy endeavor, was perhaps just one thread in a larger, unacknowledged history of human encroachment into realms best left untouched. His actions, amplified by a rapacious desire for the unknown, resonated with something ancient, something dormant for millennia. This is the core of it. Ilara, Reed continued, her voice softer, almost a lament. The Kuros are... This is a confrontation with a force transcending our understanding of life and death. An entity seeing humanity as a fleeting, minor irritation on its ancient seabed. The weight of their words hung in the air, a crushing, undeniable truth. The curse was not a symbol of forgotten history, but history itself, alive and asserting its inexorable will. It wasn't a punishment, it was a consequence, a living echo of a violation committed in the name of discovery and greed. The abyss was not merely a place, it was a memory, a consciousness finally stirring. And Silas, the innocent heir, was its chosen conduit. The final confrontation was not one of defiance, but of agonizing, horrifying comprehension. The silence that descended upon Blackwood Cove in the weeks and months that followed was not one of peace, but of a profound, heavy understanding. Silas's terrifying episodes did indeed recede. The violent fits were replaced by a quiet, almost reverent stillness. He no longer spoke in the ancient guttural tongues, but the intricate, impossible maps he once scrawled with frenzied hands now appeared, meticulously rendered, in his journals. They were no... But the spiritual inheritance, the monstrous debt, transformed into something far more insidious, a shared, unspoken awareness. Alara and Lyra, though spared the direct physical anguish, carried the weight of what they had witnessed, what they now knew. The Marrow lineage was not freed from its ancient tether, but rather its relationship to it had irrevocably shifted. They were no longer merely victims of a curse, but reluctant custodians of a terrifying truth. Forever bound to the abyssal guardians Captain Alistair had disturbed, their isolation, once a cage, became a shield. The world outside, with its mundane concerns and its steadfast belief in a quantifiable reality, seemed impossibly distant, irrelevant. They lived now with the profound knowledge that beneath the shimmering surface of our familiar oceans lay not just undiscovered species, but entire forgotten epochs, civilizations older than time, and entities whose existence defied every tenet of human comprehension. The house in Blackwood Cove, once a place of fear, became a silent archive, a sentinel guarding the echo of a primordial scream from the deep. This is the chilling legacy of the Marrows. Not merely a tale of a family tormented, but a stark, unsettling reminder of humanity's hubris in the face of the truly unknown. It is a testament to the idea that some debts are not merely financial, but existential, owed not to man, but to forces far grander and more ancient than our fleeting civilizations. The Strait of Malacca, a distant crucible of their ancestors' folly, became a metaphor for all the deep places of the world that harbor secrets best left undisturbed. Their story, whispered from the storm-battered shores of Maine, invites us to consider the terrifying fragility of our dominion and the enduring power of what lies beneath. What other forgotten horrors, what other impossible truths lie waiting in the vast, unexplored abyssal plains? How many more ancestral curses, born of greed and trespass, silently fester beneath the waves, waiting for the opportune moment to surface and claim their due? The Marrow family's desperate struggle was not just for survival, but for the very soul of their lineage, a fight that transcended human understanding. And in their silent victory, a new kind of terror was born, the terror of knowing. The ocean, in its eternal wisdom, demanded its price, and the Marrows, in their enduring quietude, paid it. But this is not the end of such mysteries. This deep blue world holds countless more. Join us again as we continue to plumb the depths of history and myth. Dive with us into this unexplored abyssal world. Are you ready to uncover the secrets of the deep? Stay with us, because what we are about to reveal may change your perception of the oceans forever. The oceanic adventure is just beginning.